Welcome to Minerva Meets. I'm your host, Sonal Chandler. This is episode 2, and with me today, I have a longtime friend and colleague, Rohit Gupta. Rohit is CEO of a company called the Gupta Consulting, which is a firm based out of Greenville, South Carolina, and he specializes in consulting on legal financial systems. Rohit, thank you so much for being here.
Sonal, thank you for having me on episode 2. I'm very excited about the podcast. I know I'll listen to episode 1. I'm very excited about you and what you're achieving.
Thanks so much. So I wanted to give a little background about today's episode. It's about legal analytics and how law firms can enhance their back office by leveraging analytics. And I wanted to take a minute to explain what inspired the topic for this episode. A few weeks ago, I was actually at an event centered around technology disruption, which covered topics about AI, automation, and data. And at this event, I met an attorney who was there to learn more about how he can leverage some of these technologies with his firm. And that inspired me to do an episode to really focus on helping small to mid-sized firms who might need some guidance on how to start embracing some of these technologies. And so I obviously thought of you when I was thinking about this topic and wanted to get you on so we can dive into some of these topics.
Thank you, Sonal. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about things like legal analytics as well as some AI topics that we could discuss today as well.
Great. So I thought we should start this discussion by explaining to our listeners what we really mean by legal analytics. Are we talking about data that's about cases won or lost, or is this about the time that attorneys might spend researching, or both? Can you help us understand a little bit about what we mean by legal analytics?
Sure. Legal analytics it can focus on maybe 3 buckets of data. One of the first buckets of data is court records and litigation data, for example. So court records and litigation data, maybe patterns and trends in legal proceedings, how judges may or may not favor a certain type of case or ruling, and outcomes of that, and what legal strategies can be effective with historical trends or outcomes in previous cases. That's one, court records and litigation data. Another bucket of data is law practice data. So part of their business operations and internal activities, such as the number of cases maybe a firm is handling, appeal rates, billing history, and things like that. So that's more on with kind of internally of what a law practice might be looking at. And then we have maybe client data is probably a third bucket, I would say. So maybe current, starting off with client data is former clients, current clients, and prospective clients. So current clients, we can analyze that, look at what, the billing history, their payment history, what type of work we're doing for them, but also former clients of why, what we did for them in the past and why they're no longer a client. It could be a conflict of interest. It could be a client that hasn't been paying in a timely manner, but then also looking at prospective customers or clients. What can we do to analyze the data to either geographically, because our firm has attorneys in a certain area, or we don't have attorneys in a certain area, maybe we want to focus on certain either geographical areas or practice groups. Attorneys, I've seen firms either merge or gain new practice leaders or start new practice departments that may want to analyze their data and saying, okay, what can we do to expand our customer base? So that's a big part of it. And I think today, what I have more history on is more around the law practice data and client data. What can back office, more working with CEOs and CFOs of how can we leverage this data to become more profitable, check our realization rates. Internally, let's look at attorney stats. Which attorneys are busy? Which attorneys are more profitable than others? Things like that. So legal analytics, it could be a broad range of things. It's really any data that a law firm can leverage internally with their internal systems, between the financial system, between CRM, and even HR data. We're seeing a lot of D&I, EOC requests that come in for client requesting that type of data to see what mixture of type of attorney that might be working on cases.
Yeah, so it almost sounds like leveraging data to make more informed decisions and having the data, which is really the evidence to help you make those more informed decisions.
Yeah, that's correct. That's right. We want to take the data and let's make a story out of it and
Right.
see where that story goes.
Right. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of what legal analytics is, can you talk a little bit about why it's important and why firms should try to embrace performing analytics on the data that they're collecting?
Sure. I think historically, law firms may not have had the thought or a CEO or COO in a role. And as law firms have kind of evolved or changed and seen across the industry, there have been more of, law firms running as a business, right? Yeah, we have attorneys, we're trying cases, we're trying to win those cases, be successful, but it's also a business. So what are CEOs, CFOs, COOs, what are they looking at? And that's where the analytics come into play, right? So with analytics, we have attorneys, they're typically we have an hourly rate with attorney. What's the proper hourly rate that's either the type of work they're doing or geographically what they're working on. Is there a way to make it a more profitable? Maybe get rid of the hourly rate and go to a flat rate and analyzing that. So that's a whole nother aspect of how do we make things more efficient if we are able to price something that's competitive to the market, but also make the firm more profitable with pricing that out. So I think it's just more of those folks coming in. There's folks coming in from the financial industry, from other industries that say, wait, we've seen data analytics working this way. What can we do with legal data, law firm data that can make us in a better financial position than we were before?
It all sort of leads to profitability, right? Like, how can you become more efficient and more profitable as a business? And I think typically we tend to look at law firms more as, places to go and get legal advice versus a business. And I think you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, exactly. And you have those folks in the back end that are still time is being worked, and there are people sending out bills, and there are people like collecting that cash. And that's what I focused on a lot is that back end is really that WIP to cash, right? Where WIP is work in progress. How are we getting that out the door on bills, and how timely are we getting that money back in, right? And that could lead to how not only probable a client is, but is a client paying? Is a client, they haven't paid us over a year. We still need to do work with them. And there are some of those where we have attorneys that have those relationships with those clients, but also let's think about it, because are we making money off this client? Or are we, what are we doing for that specific example of is this the right thing for the firm, right? And as you have firms, smaller firms are going to run a little bit different if have a handful of attorneys versus mid-sized or larger firms. If you have a firm that's 200-300 attorneys up to 1,600 attorneys, that might be a little bit more influential as far as what are we doing with the firm.
Yeah. Well, that's super helpful. How are firms leveraging this data? So, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I was hoping you could maybe go into a little bit more detail on, what are some of the small to mid-sized or even mid-sized to larger firms? How are they leveraging the data? And do you see and I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but are you seeing some of the same use cases across the different types of sizes of firms? Or, is it sort of the smaller ones are doing this and then the mid to larger are using the data differently?
Yeah. And a lot of it is, I'll tell you with AR, and that's accounts receivable, that's things that have bills that haven't been paid. And that's been the last several clients I worked on. We focus on that, especially with year end, right? So we're at the beginning of the year, it's year end, what kind of cash can we get at the door? And that's a big push. And we're pushing for attorneys to reach out to their clients. So let's bring money in the door. So that's a big factor, because that affects the financial books, what that affects what as law firms running as partnerships and corporations, that affects what goes in their pockets, right? That affects what, the comp that they're making. So that's a pretty big one, is AR, and I've seen that across across any size firm with that. And that's really billing data and collection data.
Gotcha.
That I'm seeing. Again, we talked about profitability. Profitability is a big one, which clients are profitable more than others, and attorney-wise too. So you can run attorneys, which attorneys are efficient, which attorneys look, so and so is not, they're not hitting their hours. They're made, that's going to affect their partnership, right? If you have an associate that's not hitting their certain criteria of hours, either they won't get their bonus numbers, or that may not be eligible for partnership. And different law firms have different rules around billable hours and consistently hitting them in order to be a partner or shareholder in a law firm. So that's a massive metric to look at, is billable hours and making sure they're busy. And you'll have these ebbs and flows with the financial world and the market in general, as far as, are people busy? Are we trending data down? What are we seeing in the market that we're not getting the work in? So if a billable hours, if someone's not working their billable hours, is it because the work is not coming in, or is the work going to different attorneys and they're working all those hours and these other attorneys are sitting there and waiting for work? Or it could be a performance issue of the hours may not look that high, or talk to the attorney and figure out, does there need to be a change with this, right? And that could lead to, again, promotions, and the opposite of, layoffs, is if it doesn't hit the bottom line.
Sure. And, it just sort of came to mind as you were talking about these different types of data. How are attorneys collecting this? I mean, I'm assuming that a lot of this is back office systems that are collecting this data, but was there a point, like, I mean, have you walked into a situation where it's just a bunch of spreadsheets and you've got to make some sense out of that? Or, tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, and it really depends on, that's a good question. It really depends on the law firm and what technologies the law firm has implemented. Either it could be, Excel spreadsheet that CFO, if they have a CFO, to say, the CFO might be pulling that data out of the system directly and using pivot tables and charts to slice and dice that data. Or it could be anywhere from SSRS, which is a pretty standard Microsoft product, SQL Server reporting services that we have seen a lot of reports that are built off of that. It's a little bit more across the board, not just used by law firms, but used by all across industries, of creating those types of data, either flat reports or group reports based on, again, office, geographical things, practice areas, so they can comparatively check. Because sometimes you can't take an office, let's say in Greenville, South Carolina, versus office in New York, right? The rates might be different. The numbers might look different, but for grouping them off to office, and same thing for practice areas. Practice area rates may differ from practice area to practice area. Banking may be different than real estate, things like that. And I've seen a lot of more in the last several years as far as dashboards, right? Dashboards is one of those buzzwords or things that people use. Oh, I want a dashboard, which maybe just be a report, and someone might think it's a dashboard, or a true interactive dashboard. You can drill into data, and dashboards can look nice with charting and trends and things like that. And Power BI, again, another Microsoft off-the-shelf product. I've seen a lot of that as far as dashboards and having different levels of dashboards, right? So having attorney dashboards, they can only see their own data, their own originations, and like we said, billing and collections data. And then firm level or C-level dashboards. Let me be able to look at across the whole firm to see where we land, where we need to focus on. Do we need to focus on certain clients? Do we need to get more collections from because they're lagging behind? So I've seen a lot of Power BI in the last several years, as far as trying to build that interactive dashboard to drill into data, to slice and dice the data. And you'll have different flavors of folks that want like nice colors and graphics, and some people a CFO probably just wants the data. They don't care about.
Making it look pretty, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you talk about dashboards and, coming from the execution space, project execution is really relies on dashboards and creating those reports for leadership to look at and make informed decisions. So I can appreciate how important dashboards are. And, I'm curious to understand, are dashboards and these types of reports something that have been in the legal space for some time, or do you feel that it's just kind of becoming more popular?
I think that goes to the size of the firm and how many resources they have in-house. I think when I first started in the industry, we'll say 20 plus years ago, and I was at a seeing from a smaller firm perspective, is they're just doing the basics, right? They have limited data, limited resources, and as you've gone through, and it also depends on the leadership that's there as far as, how are we going to invest in this, right? Are we going to invest in financial analysts or data analysts to look at this data? Because what's our end goal, right? We don't know. Firms might not know what their end goal is. You don't know what you don't know unless you start asking questions, right? You start looking at it. People are curious as far as, the numbers don't lie when you start looking at that stuff. So I think in the last several years, especially with data, I've definitely seen more than ever as far as how important data is. And I mean, data runs our lives, right? Data runs anywhere from what we're looking at between, our personal budgets to everything. And once you start looking at that, and you're like, spend this on how much, right? That becomes pretty important. And, I've heard stories of even bigger firms, a couple hundred firms that didn't have a budget, right? They never ran a budget as far as from the legal perspective, not on a case by case, but from legal's perspective, there was no budget. It's like, how can you be profitable and know where your money is being spent if you don't have a budget and kind of follow that budget? And that's becoming, as I'm seeing CFOs and COOs and COs coming from either different law firms or across different industries coming in and saying, wait a minute, we have to change our thought process here.
So it's almost this modernization of the legal firm, if you will. And what's interesting, you kind of mentioned these C-level roles, and I'm almost afraid to ask, but are these roles like a CFO, are those like sort of newer roles in a law firm, or are those roles that have always been around?
From what I've seen, they're probably a little bit newer. I think when I first probably started the industry, it wasn't as common. You would just see maybe an attorney that's been there for a while kind of running it and who may not have a business background. They have the legal background, they're a great attorney, and they may be a great financial person, but unless you may not have that experience as far as running actual company. And I think that's been probably a little bit more prominent. And I think with the bigger law firms, AmLaw 50, AmLaw 100, that's probably been there for a little bit longer. But I think some of these smaller firms, they're trying to figure out who do we put in these roles to help run our business.
Sure. The same question applies, I think, from a technology perspective. Like, a lot of firms, law firms don't necessarily have in-house tech. And I know that maybe in the last 10 years or even more, that's becoming a bigger thing. Do you agree? Like, do you see that as well? Or has tech sort of always been part of a law firm?
I'm definitely seeing a higher trend and more investment in tech, right? So between back-end systems, I mean, there's all these back-end systems between servers, and that's all the tech stuff that needs to be up and running, databases, right? So as we talk about data, you also need large, you need databases to store that data, terabytes and terabytes of data. However, part of that trend the last several years is now things may not be on-prem anymore. So now we're talking about cloud services, and now we're going to the cloud. So now you're paying for a service, but you're not paying an employee for example. You might not be paying a network person or a database person because now that's in the cloud, but you're still paying probably maybe a higher price, right, to host something in the cloud. So it's been kind of, maybe the trends have just changed. I'm not saying
Mhm.
financially investments have gone down because you're not paying a person versus a service. I think the resources in those investments may have shifted a little bit.
Sure,
Um,
yeah.
and then the last couple of years, especially I'm very specific in financial systems, really working with accounting departments and financial systems, bridging that gap between accounting and IT is just finding people that can even do it.
Yeah.
If it's either generationally or just the experience, there are in-house positions that, firms are trying to bolster their in-house talent that just may not be able to find it just because they may be lacking in the industry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I'm seeing that challenge across the board or across many industries, but a lot of law firms and other smaller organizations embrace managed services, and which is great because they've got these external organizations that are sort of handling their IT. But when it actually comes to really understanding how a law firm works and the ins and outs, I really think it's important to have that resource that's employed by the firm itself because having somebody coming in from the outside every now and then doing things, they might not necessarily understand exactly how the law firm works, the ins and outs of the nuances of your organization and even the type of law that you might be focusing in on. And so having somebody in-house that is focused and dedicated on that data and understands the data and understands how to mine that data, I think is key for any law firm.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to maybe a chicken and egg issue of,
Yeah.
to ask the question as far as have I seen a trend in more focus on data, right? Financial data.
Mhm.
And yes, but then a lot of times you're looking for people with legal experience, but because there's a trend up, you may not have people with legal experience. So you
Right.
kind of have a
Right.
catch-22 where it's fine. People come from different industries that come into the legal world. And like, it's just very different of how data, how the business is run and how to look at the data. So it's just trying to invest in those people to get them comfortable and working with the firm.
Yeah, I mean, just in this conversation, I've learned so much about how different legal analytics are from, let's say, healthcare data. So it's just sort of interesting to hear those different perspectives. Well, let's pivot a little on a big topic that everybody is talking about, which is AI. And several clients that I've worked with are keeping their attorneys pretty busy lately, poring over privacy and compliance challenges. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about how AI is impacting the law firm itself, and not necessarily from a service perspective, because I think we hear a lot about that aspect in the news, but more internally, like are law firms embracing AI to sort of cut down on some of the work that they've got going on, or are you seeing this sort of risk averse approach? Tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing in this aspect.
Sure. Yeah, I think AI again, it's multiple aspects of it, right? As far as AI on the attorney end of it, creating documents or practicing something differently in order to win a case versus some back end type things. And one of the biggest things I think around AI and some of the data I've seen or some of the products I've seen is really around compliance. And one of the biggest things is we've seen this, and anyone in the legal industry will know if you put in time, you send out those bills, and clients are going to say, I don't pay for that, right? I don't pay for if the term research is in there or certain terms that they don't pay for that. So, from a compliance aspect of it is how do we comply with our time entry guidelines, our outside counsel guidelines in order to get your time billed and paid at 100%. And a lot of that is happening where attorneys are putting their time, they're submitting it, and they're done with it. And then, the back office folks are billing it and they're trying to collect it. And there's a whole back and forth of, well, we're not going to pay for this. And there's this entire appeals process that a lot of my clients are dealing with, is this whole back and forth with attorneys, and they appeal it with their clients and insurance companies, and just kind of going back and forth. So a lot of that is, I've seen a couple of tools out in the market as far as, well, let's try to get the time entry phase. So when attorneys are actually putting it in, let's warn them to say, this may not get paid, or this may get reduced, or something's going to happen, A, to prompt them so they can put in their time entry properly, but B, to also have the attorney maybe help them learn as they go along. Oh, with this client, this is the way we need to write our narratives, and with that client, this is the way we need to do it. So that's a pretty big part of it. And I think, now, I've seen some tools, well, then more, the time entry portion would be fantastic. That would be a huge, time saver for the down the road collections of that time. But then there are some at the billing side as well, similar tools that kind of help warn or say, hey, this may not get paid right at this time, or this may get reduced, because again, going down to those outside counsel guidelines of what could get paid and what reduced. And that, again, that goes back to profitability and collections and all of that. That's the bottom line of running a law firm business, right? And it's the firms willing to invest in that, right? What's the return on investment as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, and I kind of feel like it's need to justify is sort of everywhere, because very similar to consulting, right? When you're doing time entry and you're trying to make sure that what you're putting in as time spent on a specific client actually is adding value to the client. And you want to make sure that you're not necessarily getting any appeals on your billing, because that, obviously is not fun to have to go through.
Yeah. And rates is a big thing too, right? We talk about rates, make sure the rates are proper. And part of that is, do we have the appropriate rates that were agreed upon? And I don't have a solution for this. Is there AI to know if the rates were put in correctly and billed correctly, right? And that's part of algorithms that need to be built out in order to capture those at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if there were clients that were, probably wondering if the rates they're paying are adding value if you've got an AI component doing research for you. Right? Like,
right.
I could have done that myself.
Right. And I think that also comes down to, historically law firms have been the billable hour, right? Everything, you're making your money off the billable hour, but also now it's, shifting into flat fee agreements of, I'm going to do this for you. Here's what I'm going to bid at that price. And that comes down to data analytics and AI, like let's crunch all these numbers in order to be, competitive rate, but also what's profitable for the firm to do that, right? This is the price we're going to charge for this type of work. And that's part of the shift as well, as far as thinking. And as we have AI technologies out there, and anywhere from like creating documents, right, automatically, those types of work.
Sure. Well, we touched on AI, and now I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about automation, because I have completely embraced automation. I spoke about automation in my first episode, but I've really started using it to help me get more efficient in my day-to-day work. And I was wondering a little bit more about how law firms are embracing automation, or are they? And if so, what are some of the use cases you've seen?
Sure, yeah. With automation, I think with law firm technology, there could be, with your time billing system, many pieces that go with that your AP system might be separate, your actual time recording system might be separate. So a lot of that, as far as integrations, right? Maybe not automations, but integrations within that. But some of the automations I've seen is with RPA, robotic process automation of tasks, and that's, we could program to have tasks done for you, right? So let's say someone's been, every day they go in and they click a button, or they're doing these steps to create a report, or um, doing some transactions that, as long as you can run it through like RPA program, that can be done, right? So you're talking about a daily task, a weekly task, or a monthly task that could save hours and hours of work, with someone, without having someone to log it, doing all that stuff, as long as it's programmed correctly. And again, that's one of those things is building the RPA, it's kind of scary because it could be expensive, right? It could be, oh, someone's going to take over now. And it could also be the person. If someone's doing something and they're afraid of their job and you sit with them, are they going to tell you every single thing, right? Because they're going to
Mhm.
say, well, someone's going to take over me. And that's kind of a scary thing as a staff member, right?
Right,
Of
right.
oh, they want to come in and automate my job, but you there still needs to be, that could help you in your day to day, so you're not doing some of these tasks that you could be doing otherwise. Or you can help out with developing the RPA tasks, right? You can be an innovator for your firm, for those members that may not think like that, maybe not think about it in those terms of, oh, that's a good idea. Let me help with IT or whoever's building the RPA process or whatever automated process. Let me be an advocate for it now, right? And maybe some of that mindset change. But I think that's part of, really, with anything, with AI replacing attorneys, AI replacing staff, but there are people that still need to build those tools for AI
Yeah, no,
or
absolutely.
automation.
Absolutely. In fact, I think you touched on a really important topic here because there's this whole change management aspect around implementing these technologies, especially in firms that may not have completely embraced technology as much as perhaps like an IT firm, right? And especially with things like RPA, there's this whole idea that, oh gosh, if I tell them everything, perhaps that my job will be eliminated. And really it's about, the firms I think has a responsibility to implement change management correctly when it comes to things like this, because really to sort of teaching their staff and giving them the confidence that, hey, if you can automate this part of your job, then you can actually go and focus on more strategic initiatives that will, help you, like you said, help you be an innovator for the firm or even just for personal growth reasons, right? So really kind of taking that mindset and shifting it into how can I grow versus living in fear when it comes to technology.
Exactly, that's exactly right. I think in another aspect that you mentioned is change management. That's a whole nother aspect of, not only, oh, we're getting a new operating system, new piece of software. It's changing how we think about things and this quote unquote scary technology that might be coming.
Yeah, yeah. And I think oftentimes, especially like with AI, I'm sort of reading two different sides of it. One where you've got the people who are completely embracing it, and then you've got this other camp where, they're saying, oh my gosh, it's going to be the end of human society as a whole. And I think there's some middle ground here, and I think just sort of learning to embrace it and learn from it and understanding how to leverage it in your life is key, right? And I think firms need to sort of do the same thing. I mean, obviously, there's different implications from using it for personal pleasure, but I think that you kind of have to sort of sift through some of the noise and figure out what's the right use case for your organization.
Yeah. And I think when you have human interaction as well, that could lead to mistakes, right?
Yeah.
So as we build these tools, and we, like going through, like, AI is, simulation of human intelligence processes, right? So
Mhm.
doing those processes, but doing it more in an automated way can help reduce errors, right? If we
Right.
if we put something in wrong and we send out the wrong data to a client that they shouldn't be seeing,
Oh, goodness.
versus having you know a computer doing it, or or AI, or a automated process that may help reduce some of that, right? I mean, that may help reduce some of maybe a mistake that may or may not happen by human interaction, right? Because
Yeah.
people are all kinds of things are going through people's lives, either personally or at work, right? We're working, we get pinged, we forget, we go back. What was I working on? And then you don't remember, you don't remember what you were
Yeah,
doing.
absolutely. Well, can you touch a little bit on some of the barriers or challenges that law firms might have with embracing technologies and legal analytics?
Yeah, I think part of it is the cost, right? It's getting over the hump of, well, we
Mhm.
have to invest in something else, and it's thinking of the investment versus an expense, right?
Right,
Like this, oh, is this really overhead, or what's the what am I going to pay in now to get the return on investment later, right? I think that's
sure.
part of it. I think parts of maybe firms don't have the technical expertise in house to think about, even come with ideas or even implement those strategies or those
Right.
ideas. I think some of that might be lacking. I think some of it's around again eliminating human jobs is limit potentially eliminating those and from depending on how you look at it. Well, like we talked about, that can lead though for that person to be a little bit, to do something a little bit different
Sure.
versus their tasks.
Yeah.
I think part of it too is just the not understanding what can be implemented, right? So for one example, there's time entry capture software out there, right? So what that means is, let's say, typically attorney would work on their time, work, and then they have an application, they put in their time, or they have a timer that runs, you can do it. But there's applications now that run on your computer that know what once a how long the document's been opening, you've been working on it, how long you've been working in an email, which appointments you have on your calendar, what phone calls. I think we're getting away from hard landlines, but phone calls, things like that, right? That can kind of capture a diary of what you're doing, right? And
Yeah.
that the return on investment could be high because there could be a 10 or 15-minute call that you forget about, or 10 or 15-minute email that could be capturing it.
Mhm.
So that could be a great tool, but on the disadvantage of it, people think of that being Big Brother, right? People are
Right. I'm
scared to
thinking the
implement
same
someone.
thing. Yeah.
Oh no, I don't want to run on my machine. I don't want to run on my machine. And I'll tell you, or again, it could be websites, right? It could be something that you're researching or looking up for a case that they don't want tracked. But I will tell you, if you're working a firm, most of that stuff's probably being tracked already, right? It
Mhm.
might not be tracked and shown to you, but that the fact of the matter is those are going through the firm's systems, the firm's network, and anything you probably browse is probably going to be trackable with that. So I think there's just some, again, not knowing those nuances of what's quote unquote being tracked, and not really understanding the technology and what could lead to the bottom line of the firm. I think there's some disconnect there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, there you have it, people. Everything is being tracked. Well, one last burning question, and this is more, I just want to kind of get your opinion on this, is, in every industry that I interact with, there's this conversation around, oh my goodness, AI is going to replace everybody, right? So let me ask you, do you think that AI is going to replace lawyers?
I think AI is going to make their own podcast, right? You're not going to have a podcast anymore. No, I think, there still needs to be oversight of that, right? If a document's being created, you're still going to need a license and in a state and you're starting to practice law. You can't have AI is not going to be able to have a license and try a case, in front of a
Right,
jury, right?
right.
There's still going to be those aspects of it. You're not going to be able to put something in chat gpt and put all your firm data out there and not and here you have it, right? I think
Mhm.
there's some of those things. I mean, AI in the last several years has like blown up, right? That's the buzzword. Like, what does that mean?
Mm.
Machine learning, deep learning. What does that really mean? Is that really going to replace people? I think it will change the way attorneys focus on the type of work they're doing. Again, I think going back to flat, there may be opportunities for firms to price things more on a flat fee basis because some things might be more efficient, and attorneys can focus on more high level tasks than trying to recreate a document or things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll just reiterate a quote from episode 1 where we talked about AI. And really, it's those that embrace AI will probably replace those that don't. So it's not necessarily the technology, but it's the people who don't embrace it. So, and I think that applies here as well.
I think that's a fantastic quote, right? And part of AI is, again, it's AI, it's really, as long as an algorithm to kind of build, doing those interactions and learning itself, right? And you're gonna have people that need to develop those AI algorithms, right? And so there could be a shift in what our people are focused on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. Well, we've touched on quite a few topics today, and I wanted to sum up our conversation by giving our listeners a few key takeaways related to legal analytics. And, feel free to chime in. But, first, I really think that to embrace analytics, you need to start by assessing your firm's ability to embrace technology and then develop a vision around where you want to be, right? Like if you are just trying to jam in some technology, but not necessarily understanding capability of the staff in your firm, then you're probably going to have a lot of rework down the line. And secondly, I think that developing a strategy and a roadmap to get you there, that it really allows you to take advantage of some of the quick wins as well as implement some more complex solutions is key, right? We talked about looking at this as an investment versus an expense. And we talked about changing that mindset. And then finally, I think it's important to, don't be afraid to ask for help, right? Like work with a partner and or really a trusted advisor that will help you navigate this journey of getting more technical or embracing technology within your organization. Any thoughts on that, Rohit?
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. I think point 3, as far as don't be afraid, I think it doesn't hurt to ask a question, to inquire, to figure out what don't I know? Because I think that's a challenge of people may not know what they don't know. I'm not a huge fan of that phrase, but unless you ask questions, put your ego aside and just ask a question, right? Just ask what can be done. And that happens a lot. Can we do this? I'm like, we can almost do anything. Just ask it, and don't be afraid to ask and think outside the box a little bit.
Thank you. And if your organization is looking to develop a strategy or a roadmap around legal analytics, Minerva, in partnership with the Gupta Consulting, can help you get started. Drop us a line at letstalk@minervaconsultinginc.com. And Rohit, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us today.
I really appreciate this conversation. This has been fantastic. Thank you for having me on.
Why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you? I know that you're on LinkedIn, and we'll add that to the show notes. Did you want to throw your email out there?
I'm on LinkedIn, and you can reach me at rohit@thegupta.com.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much, and stay tuned for our next episode.